Hi, welcome to the Eli and Edith Bird Art Museum at Michigan State University. I'm Michelle Word. I'm the Director of Education here at the museum. Have you ever wondered, how does an artist become an artist? The answer to this question, much like others that we often ask of art, like, is it art? How is it made? What should art look like? Spans far and wide. There's not just one answer. What we can say is that all artists are different and all artworks are made differently. Today, we're here to look at the 2020 Master of Fine Arts exhibition. This features 4 emerging artists who have recently completed formal study in the art department on campus. Although not all artists choose this path, some artists do. Let's go and check out the 4 artists' work. So there are many ways to walk through an exhibition. You might start on one side and go all the way around the room. Some like to go to the center of the room, look around and find the piece that they're the most drawn to and spend a lot of time with that one work. Others often stop to check out the intro text. Intro text usually is provided by a curator or another person at the museum, and it helps you understand a little bit more about the artists on view. Here, there are 2 really important things that we learn. One, we learn the name of the 4 artists who we're going to see today. And 2, we learned that there's a way we can hear their voices. If you see here, you're invited to take out your cell phone, text a number, and then you'll be able to listen to what the artists are saying as you walk through and look at their work. It's always great to look at a work of art from far away and up close. You'll notice different details. Emily's work is one of those artists that you definitely want to see from a distance and then move closer as well. From a distance, I'd like to point out a few things you might notice. One, the shape here, which looks like a cozy, comfortable couch or chair that you might have in your living room. And 2, this here, the cityscape. Now let's come a little closer and look at Emily's work. As we move closer, we begin to see that there's a lot of layers, a lot of different textures, in many different ways that marks have been made. Sometimes a mark is made loosely with a brush. Other times it appears to have a hard edge. And even other times we see photographic imagery. We see collaged elements. Here we see a small lamp that has been collaged in. We see a mirror. And the area that from a distance I referred to as a cityscape is particularly interesting to get very close to. The closer and closer and closer you see that moment, you begin to realize that it's not a cityscape at all. This work is called The Jungle. And here we see the interior of Amazon warehouses. We see shelves stocked with goods from top to bottom. We see that reference to Amazon again in these gridded elements here, which are the top view of those same warehouses. Emily sources her collage materials from magazines and online. She cuts them up, she tears them, she manipulates them digitally as well as by hand as the painting itself is emerging. One of the things that I always find fascinating about art is that the way we see it from day to day may change, just like the way I see a work and you see a work may change. And this is because the way we experience a work of art relates to our point of view and our point of view of the world, which is constructed by our identity, all of our personal experiences, and who we are. This piece I see differently today than I did 6 months ago. After months and months and months of spending most of my time in an interior where I'm not going into shop in stores and I have a different relationship with Amazon than I've had before, that same idea of the interior, let's look at it in a couple of other pieces of Emily's. 6 months ago, I spent 10 hours a day in my home. Today, I spend nearly 24 hours a day. Inside our interior spaces, we construct our lives. Here we see signifiers of the interior and assume that maybe this is a kitchen. We see a stove, we see a backsplash. We also see the reference to a window. And this is a collaged element where we see a curtain that might be kind of flapping in the breeze over a window and light coming through it. And then that same window is referenced over and over and over in other ways. Here we see a gridded version of it that's been spray painted on with a stencil. And then we see it represented again in what looks like kitchen cabinets or the grid of the backsplash. This painting itself almost becomes a window. Notice it's hung very low to the ground. And if you're standing far away and walking towards it, you could almost imagine that you're going to walk into a new space. Think about what our spaces hold. Think about the memories. Think about how space is psychological as much as physical. In this particular piece, as I think about memories, I notice how much information has been removed. We see part of the stove. We see part of the tile backsplash. We see small parts and pieces that make up our spaces, that make up our memories. Another artist who's also thinking a lot about his environment and the spaces that he spent a lot of time in is Hector Acuna. And similarly to the paintings by Emily Somoskey that we just saw, Hector's work has an interior element that plays quite significantly out through the work. And if you look behind me, you can see this large painting with an interior of a barn. There's quite a lot going on inside of that barn. Lots of bits and fragments of information. Let's look at it closer. Hector's really interested in identity, and he's thinking closely about his own identity. In some ways, these pieces are self-portraits. In other ways, they mirror back to us how our identity is formed. If we look at this side of the painting, we see the artist Hector. And Hector is representing himself inside this large barn that existed on the property where he grew up in rural Wisconsin. Hector is also representing, on this side of the painting, many of the representations that he experienced, that he consumed growing up as a youth with Mexican heritage. And here we see cartoon characters. We notice that they're wearing a sombrero. We see a piñata. We see representations of Mexican heritage that function like stereotypes. Looking here, we see the actor Noel G. And at the top it says, how did this dude play the same damn role with the same name in every movie? And we see a list of the movies and his name, Hector, 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 which is also the artist's name. Let's look quickly at the barn. Those same stereotypes, representations of his Mexican heritage can be seen when you peer inside this barn. The barn for Hector frames a lot of his identity. He's thinking about this shape, this barn that existed on his property growing up. And inside the barn would have been animals. Also, Hector remembers a skateboard ramp being there, Halloween parties that were thrown there. It becomes an interior space in Hector's life where he can point to some of the moments that form his identity. And so Hector is thinking about the tension there between the personal experiences, the cultural experiences, family, the way they form our identity, and what people tell him about his identity. And when we think about what one is told in the media about their identity, we must also remember that others are told those same stereotypes, and then they perpetuate them. Now we're in an immersive installation by artist Rebecca Casement titled Reclamation. What is an installation, you might ask? The best way to answer that question is for you to join me as I walk around the space. When an artist works an installation, they're creating a space that we can move in and out of They often add sound components and maybe even other things that connect to our senses, such as smell. To describe this space for you a little bit, I want to talk about the materials. You'll find ceramic works that are on the floor, many of which look as if they have been broken or pulled apart in different ways. They have a glaze on them that feels like they've been in a fire for a long time. You'll also see very fragile pieces on the floor that almost seem as if they're eggs. Above us, are metal pieces that have been pulled together, held together with just string, and you wonder if the tension of that string is enough to keep this bound metal in place. The metal itself is sourced from a saw. It's a band saw. And that same tension we see in how these pieces are hung with just a piece of fabric. These pieces feel almost figural. If we look here, you can see the framework. Inside is chicken wire. And the artist talks a lot about how she thinks about material in the same way that she thinks about relationships and conversations that we have with one another. That there's a give and take, a back and forth, that you have to slowly allow something to develop and be open to the fact that it's going to go places that you didn't expect. And it's those moments, those unexpected moments, that it's the very center of Rebecca's work. She's interested in thinking about trauma and thinking about the thing you couldn't plan for, the thing that we all wish didn't happen, but does happen. As she forms these pieces, she sculpts and twists and turns the wire, contorts it in different ways. Once it's in a certain satisfactory moment, she stops and she takes wire cutters and she begins to cut it apart, to break its shape, to force it to go through a change. And then layer by layer, she begins to put gauze over it. If you look at these closely, they feel almost like a cast that you might have on your arm or your leg. One final moment we'll look at is over here. Again, we see that same fragility, we see that same trace of the artist's process where something might be torn or ripped or changed. But one of the things we might notice here is the way these pieces are isolated into the corner. That pain, that trauma can make us feel isolated. In the same way that artists make work that represent their point of view, which is formed from everything that makes them who they are, your experience with a work of art will also be formed by your point of view. This work is about trauma and the experience of moving through trauma, of changing through trauma, and of our minds and our bodies coming out something different. And as you walk through this piece, you may find that your own personal experiences come to mind and change how you feel, how you relate to the work. Now, we're going to look at one more artist today. And as we go into the space, it's going to be a little dark. This is also an immersive installation, one with video and sound. And this, well, let's just say things are not quite as they appear. Let's go in. I'm standing in front of a large projection component of Marcos Seraphim's installation, Autoimmune. Marcos is interested in thinking about information, misinformation, and all the ways that information can be manipulated, distorted, disseminated, and consumed. He uses artificial intelligence to generate video that addresses the circulation of images as well as campaigns of misinformation. Specifically, he's interested in turning a close eye to the ongoing AIDS crisis. Here, we see what is referred to as deep fakes. a video generation technique that uses AI to manipulate existing content. Looking at the archival footage by Marcos, we see figures you may recognize. Here, we see US President Ronald Reagan, who initially ignored the AIDS crisis. By feeding the AI machine archival footage, it's able to learn a face, a body. From there, new content can be created that animates the body in ways that it didn't actually move. It can generate lip movements so that a figure says something that it didn't actually say. And it can superimpose facial features from one person onto another. In these two smaller screens, we see the AI machine actually learning. We also see poet Essex Hemphill, an important openly gay American poet and activist that was based in Washington, D.C. Here he reads Vital Signs, one of the last poems he wrote before his death in 1995 with AIDS complications. His poetry evoked challenges of being Black, gay, and young in the midst of the AIDS epidemic. This technology is at the forefront of concerns about the spread of false or misleading information. But with the Essex Hemphill moment, we see the technology being used for less nefarious purposes, to give voice to marginalized figures. Essex was never actually recorded on video reading vital signs. In a moment when phrases like fake news are on the tip of our tongues amidst a new pandemic, the conversation that Marcos encourages are all the more relevant. Information is power. What do we really know about the information that we do and do not consume? To quote the exhibition curator, Stephen Bridges, what is the relationship between an autoimmune virus, a computer virus, and a societal sickness? Thanks for joining me on this quick glimpse of the Master of Fine Arts exhibition here at the MSU Broad. If you want to visit the museum, book a free ticket online and don't forget your mask. We'd love to see you.